Well, thank you everyone for coming today and participating in this event. Um, it's the 40th anniversary of the National Crime Victims' Rights Week, and I think it bears repeating. The theme is support victims, build trust, and engage communities. I think that's an excellent theme, which really captures a lot of what this organization is about and what this particular week means to both the victims of crime as well as those who give a good portion of their lives helping victims through these very disturbing situations that occur. I'd like to start today because we have such an eclectic group of participants. I'm just going to briefly mention it, their names and so forth. I would ask anyone to speak at this point. For the program, we have three outstanding speakers who will cover three different areas. And also Commissioner Director, Morris County Board of Commissioners Director, Stephen Shaw, will also have a presentation, which we will do as soon as I'm done introducing everyone that's participating. So first of all, I'd just like to read through a list, if I could, of participants. Senator Christian M. Corrado, Senator Anthony Bucco, Assemblywoman Betty Lou DeCroce. We have a representative from Assemblywoman Ora Dunn's office, Christopher Paz. Eric Hamilton is also participating. He's a person representing Congressman Malinowski. John Bonanni, our county administrator. Heather Darling, our county surrogate. As I've mentioned, Stephen Shaw, our commissioner director. Also a commissioner, Catherine DiFilippo. Our Director of Communications, Brian Murray, Sheriff Jimmy Gannon, Christopher Canizo, our Chief of Police from East Hanover, a Chief of Police from the Morris County Park Police, Gabe DiPietro, Chief of Police of Morris Plains, Michael Kurowski, Chief of Police of Jefferson, Paul Castamore, the Chief of Police of Mountain Lakes, Sean Bennett, the Chief of Police of Morris Township, Mark DiCarlo, representing retiree from the Dover Police Department, Joseph Gabriz. We also have with us Jim O'Brien and Trish O'Brien, who we thank you very much for your participation today, who are keeping the memory of Deidre O'Brien alive and also doing great work in the area of victimology. Diane Williams is one of our speakers today. She's the president and CEO of JBWS. Maria Savatier, she's the executive director of Deidre's House. Nancy Bagan, who's a therapist at Deidre's House. Helen Bairstow, likewise a therapist at Deidre's House. Olga Munez, she likewise is a therapist at Deidre's House. Melody Runyon, an associate director of Prevention is Key. Ingrid Vacaballaro, a regional director of Family Intervention Services. Maria Lagatuta, who is the director of the Morris Family Justice Center. Diana Kurlander, who is the vice president of Client Services, JBWS. Sherry Atchison, lead clinician at Morris County Sexual Assault Center. Michelle Feuderer, who is a child specialist at the Morris Family Justice Center. Michelle Salino, a therapist and clinical coordinator of volunteers. SART as it's known. Beth Jacobson, who's the Director of Community Response and Education for New Bridge Services. Heather McDonald, a registered nurse at Drew University. Zuza Nagy, who is a social worker. Cynthia Garrett, Title IX coordinator at Drew University. Richard Gill, supervising investigator of Victims of Crime Compensation Office. Sergeant Charles Quaint of the Riverdale PD. Marianne McCrone, a therapist. We also have numerous representatives of the prosecutor's office today. Maggie Calderwood, our first assistant prosecutor, our chief, Chris Kimker. We also have Melanie Smith, who's one of our chief assistant prosecutors. Meg Rodriguez, who's active in this field. She's a supervising assistant prosecutor. Chris Shellhorn, who supervises our major crimes unit. He's very active in this area also. Our public information officer, Megan Nabb, is also participating, and our office manager, Michelle Rhinesmith, our one of our assistant prosecutors, Laura Magnone, and a whole series of other participants, either they be in the investigative unit or in our legal unit or support staff. taken up enough time with this, but I just wanted everyone to know that the broad scope of the list of participants today. We have both law enforcement, we have from the social side, but everyone that's on this call is interested in victims. And I think that it says a lot when we get this type of participation, both at the legal level, at the political level, and certainly at the law enforcement level, where there's been outstanding outreach, in my experience, certainly in this field. So I want to thank every one of those persons named I've read. I'm sure I've missed some people, but I just wanted you all to know that this is something that we take very seriously, and we're very much committed to making, helping our victims get through these very trying times when they're called and they're thrust into the criminal justice system. So the first thing I'd like to do now then would be to recognize the Morris County Board of Commissioner Director Stephen Shaw. I believe, Director, you have a presentation for today?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, Prosecutor Carol. And I want to welcome everybody for tuning into this event. So true that it's so important to have all the folks here participating so that we never forget. I'm going to keep my comments brief, which I'm sure is welcomed by everybody in this day of endless Zoom meetings, because we have other speakers today who play significant roles in helping victims of crime and some of our most vulnerable people in Morris County. And I think it's really more important to hear their insights, especially in these times of unrest that we're finding in our country. But it's critical that we recognize the 40th anniversary of National Crime Victim Rights Week. And I think it's important to remember it was actually a heinous crime right here in Morris County back on December 5th, 1982, that gave rise to one of the most ardent and effective advocates for victim rights in New Jersey. James O'Brien of Mendon Township lost a daughter to a serial killer who had already murdered another young woman in our community that year. It was just months after the killer was released from prison in Florida, where he had already served 11 years for another homicide. Those crimes, if anybody was here to remember that, they really gripped Morris County with fear until the killer was caught. It was really a very scary and dark time in Morris County. Still, I am unsure we can fully comprehend what Jim O'Brien and his entire family went through in those very dark days. We all know is that he managed to channel his anger and grief to help others who also woke up one day to find their lives turned sideways by crime. He advocated for a complete change in how authorities interacted with victims. He demanded they be treated with dignity, that they be informed of the progress of an investigation and the prosecution when the criminals were caught. He demanded that they be informed of court proceedings, have a voice in the process, and be told of a criminal's pending release. They basically have a right to be protected. Victims were no longer to be ignored or just merely placated. Partly because of the efforts of Jim O'Brien, New Jersey finally adopted a state constitutional amendment for victim rights in 1991. It truly was a major turning point for victims. However, it clearly did not end their struggle. Jim O'Brien, many of you probably know, went on to be in the elected position that I now hold. Only then, he was called a freeholder, not a commissioner. He also became director of this board, but never strayed far from his advocacy for crime victims. While he served on the board, Morris County opened Deirdre's House, our center for child victims, named in memory of his slain daughter. Sadly, we lost Jim O'Brien in 2004 at the age of 84, but we have not forgotten him. And through annual events like this one, we will definitely not forget his cause. Crimes cannot simply be forgotten by their victims. Today, we affirm that we will not forget to defend and expand the hard-fought rights of crime victims. With this proclamation that I have here, that I will get to you, Mr. Prosecutor, the Morris County Board of County Commissioners declares this week of April 18th through April 24th to be National Crime Victims Rights Week in Morris County, with the theme this year being Support Victims, Build Trust, Engage Communities. I thank all of you And thank you, Prosecutor Carol, for keeping this tradition alive. And I'll make sure that you get a hold of this proclamation. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those eloquent words, Director Shaw. That brought home some memories for myself. I happened to be in the Attorney General's office during the investigation of Kadadich when this occurred. And I remember that case very well. And your description of Mr. O'Brien's efforts and so forth, he changed the state. I remember the law enforcement officers involved in that case. They were absolutely dedicated to find that killer. So certainly Mr. O'Brien and his whole family deserves that recognition. That's a god-awful loss.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, the first speaker we have in today's program is Diane Williams. Diane Williams is the president and CEO of the, excuse me, I'm losing my voice, of the Jersey-based Jersey Battered Women's Services, Inc. I got notes scrawled all over my notes here. Diane, just to tell you a little bit about her, she's responsible to the board of directors regarding all current operations of the agency. She also, the agency, the Battered Women's Services, offers a broad range of services for the victims of domestic violence and their children, provides counseling for abusers, a family justice center, and education and training in the communities in Morris County. They have a direct impact. The range of services include a 24-hour helpline, the Safe House, Transitional Living Resource Center, including vocational education, resident and non-resident counseling programs for victims and their children, legal advocacy, community education, professional training, and an active volunteer program. Prior to joining the JDWS, Diane had over 20 years experience in the nonprofit field working with families impacted by trauma and abuse, with 15 of those years in management and executive management positions. From 2012 through 2015, Diane was an adjunct professor at Montclair University's Masters in Child Advocacy program. She has been in private practice since 2006 in Morris County, and she specializes in treating victims of trauma. Diane earned her bachelor's in social work from Kean University and her master's in social work from Fordham University with a specialization in working with children and families. She's a New Jersey licensed clinical social worker and is certified to provide clinical supervision. We're very lucky to have Diane to address us today. And Diane, I'll turn it over to you at this point.
Great. Thank you, Prosecutor Carol. Can everybody see my screen? Wonderful. So I am just completely honored to have the opportunity to talk to you today about JBWS, but also about the intimate partner abuse issue in our community and really how it has been impacted by COVID, which is so very significant. So the beginnings of JBWS, the organization was actually founded in 1976, and it was founded by a group of women in our community who saw that there were no resources for their family members, their friends, their neighbors that were victims of domestic violence. And so what they did is they started a helpline in their own homes, and they started bringing in victims to their houses. And then shortly thereafter, there was, of course, when we hear about these sorts of things that happen in our community's response is immediate. There were 2 high-profile murder-suicides that really had the community getting behind opening the first shelter, and that happened in 1978. And so over the years, JBWS has grown to be one of the largest domestic violence organizations in the state of New Jersey. It's actually considered a model program, and the reason it's a model program is the amount of services that it provides to the community. Throughout the state of New Jersey, every county has a helpline and a shelter. But as I go through the myriad of services that we provide at JBWS, you'll get a good understanding of why we are that model program. So I was so very happy to see on the call so many of our partners, our friends, our legislative supporters, who whenever we have needed anything, whether it has been support for food in our shelter during COVID, or support around trying to find space for our family justice center, or if it was because we did not have a law enforcement presence and the sheriff said, what can we do to help? And then responded immediately. This community is a community like no other in regard to the way it supports each other's programs, but each other in and of itself. So I'm just proud to be part of that. So about intimate partner abuse. So I'll get the question, what's the difference between intimate partner abuse and domestic violence? And so domestic violence is really any sort of violence that can occur inside of a household, and that can be between parent-child, it can be siblings, or it can be a married couple. But intimate partner abuse is very specific to abuse that happens in a romantic relationship. And I'm sure that you've heard that it's not just physical, but it really talks about verbal, emotional, financial, sexual, and some of the things that we have seen since the impact of the pandemic has really been an exacerbation of issues that survivors have experienced over the years. It's just impacted them to a whole other level. So why is it so important for us to talk about domestic violence and intimate partner abuse? And it's the prevalence. Just because we are an affluent and educated community, it doesn't mean that it's not happening here. And so if you look at the statistics, 1 in 4 women, 1 in 3 teens, and 1 in 7 men will be victims of intimate partner abuse in their lifetime. And it cuts across all socioeconomic, racial, ethnic, religious lines. So no one is really protected from this issue. So what did we see during COVID? You've probably even heard there have been reports and news stories just about how COVID has impacted victims of domestic violence. And I'm sure like you all experienced that immediate fear when this happened about you're trapped at home. You really can't connect with your friends, your family, your neighbors. There's a scarcity of resources that's happening. And typically survivors of domestic violence would have these little breaks of opportunity to leave their house, or someone would go to work, or kids would go to school. But victims were trapped at home with the abusers and the children were there. And so one of the scariest things that happened across the nation and across the state was immediate silence. The phones stopped ringing. And it wasn't because domestic violence was not an issue. It was because people did not have access to reach out for help. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we responded as an organization to make sure that we got the message out there that we're open, we're safe, and we're providing services. Think about the increased stress that was in the home. Think about how your home experienced stress and probably still does because of the impact of the pandemic. So the increased stress in the home not only impacted our survivors, but we work with those that are using abuse in their relationships as well. And we were really concerned about their ability to manage some of the triggers of experiencing, loss of wages or trying to homeschool children. And then you've also probably heard about the mental health and substance abuse issues that have really increased during the pandemic. So anyone with pre-existing issues were certainly having those sorts of situations exacerbated, but there was a whole other level of new issues that arise. And these two issues, mental health and substance abuse, are reasons that lethality becomes increased in a domestic violence relationship. So many reasons why we remain concerned about the issue. So what did we do? JBWS never closed its doors to its safe house or its transitional housing, and our helpline continued to run 24/7. And we needed to make sure that our safe house was following CDC guidelines around cleanliness, around physical distancing, around protective personal equipment, and knock on wood, because obviously COVID is still an issue, that we've really been successful in mitigating some of those concerns around congregate living. So what did we see? Some of the things that we saw were an increase in severity of the situations which we had talked about. So there were times during COVID that not only did we experience a spike in some of the calls that we had seen, but we had at one point up to 4 or 5 families in a hotel placement because our shelter was completely full. And what we saw, because of the complexity of the issues, is really an increase in the need for support. So what we saw was a 77% increase between 2019 and 2020 in the amount of hours that our survivors and their children needed for the support to find safe housing and supportive assistance to get their needs met. We also saw an 831% increase in the need for people to have support in our counseling programs, 161% increase in support hours needed for transitional housing, and a 667% increase in hours for our Jersey Center for Nonviolence, which is our program that works with those that use abuse in their relationships. So overall, the complexity of the situations were really a challenge, but we certainly rose to the challenge. And so what I'm going to talk about now is just a really quick overview of our programs in and of itself and how we responded to continue to provide services during COVID. So like we had talked about previously, JBWS provides safety, support, and solutions to abuse. So it's really 3 categories of programs that we provide. Under safety, we have our helpline, which is 24/7 staff. We have a crisis response team, which is made up of volunteers in our community that are dispatched to police stations whenever there's a domestic violence call that comes in. And by the way, that never shut down, and our volunteers continue to be dispatched. We have legal advocacy services where survivors can get support when they're trying to find out what their rights are and how to navigate the process. We have our safe shelter, and that's where they can be provided with safe shelter for up to 60 days. And then we will be helping them from the time that they come in, figure out what happens next. And we have our transitional housing where families can stay for up to 2 years as they're trying to get back on their feet, to both emotionally, financially, and vocationally to make sure that they can be successful in our community. In regard to support, our Center for Healthy Relationships is our counseling program. And just like all of our other services, our legal advocacy, our Jersey Center for Nonviolence, our Morris Family Justice Center, all of those services pivoted very quickly to continue to provide remote counseling, advocacy, and support services during COVID. Our Morris Family Justice Center is really a national evidence-based program, which is a community's response to domestic violence. And we're so very fortunate, so many members of our partnership are on the call today, including the prosecutor's office and the sheriff's department and the sexual assault center, just to name a few. So the Morris Family Justice Center pivoted as well, and right now we're in the process of identifying what our transition is back to having some survivors come on site so that they can access services. And then we talk about the solutions to abuse, and that's an opportunity for us to provide rapid rehousing services in the community so that we can provide safe housing for survivors and their children. We have a community education program, and that's really made up of our ability to create more of an awareness so that people understand and that domestic violence is an issue in our community and what the resources are available to do about that. We also have a teen dating abuse prevention program. It's very active in Morris County, and last year there was over 10,000 hours of time that was provided in educating our youth about what a healthy relationship looks like. So all of these things could not have been possible without the support of the community, without a dedicated staff, and without the funding that our legislators have advocated for us to receive to continue to do this really important work. So many people say, what can we do to help? And so I've put some things here that you can certainly access and find out more information about on our website. We are looking for any sort of venue where we can talk about the issue of domestic violence. It's like a dog and pony show. We will go out and we will talk at Rotary groups. We will talk to the PTA. We will be in front of houses of worship. Go to a book club meeting. So anyone that will listen to us, we will talk about the issue and the resources, because domestic violence grows in isolation. So please be sure to reach out if you have a group that you think would benefit from this education. You can also attend one of our events. We certainly have one coming up, which is a Tricky Tray event on May 4th. And then in regard to donations, obviously financial donations are always helpful and welcome, but we have different ways that people can help out, whether it's through gift cards. We also have a wish list on our website, and that provides just some ideas about how you or anyone that you know who's looking to provide support can meet the needs of the families that access our services. So talk to us. Here are different ways that you can certainly access the information that you need. If you have a friend, a family member, someone who needs some support, or you just want to become educated about the issue and what you can do about it in our community. So I want to thank you all for providing me with this opportunity to talk about the issue of intimate partner abuse, and certainly welcome any questions about what I just talked about.
Okay, thank you very much, Diane. We appreciate the information that you provided, and certainly all the hard work that you do. I'd also like to add that your comments about domestic violence, are quite accurate, even as it affects the criminal justice system. We have been experiencing quite a bit of activity in the domestic violence area. I see it from the additional cases that are rolled out almost every week, and certainly on weekends and at odd hours when notifications go out when help is needed. In addition, suicides, obviously, both within and within law enforcement also, and overdoses. Overdoses are a constant scourge that we're dealing with. But all of these things, I think, also are impacted by to a degree, COVID, and the fact that people have been, for the most part, restricted in their movements. But what you said is consistent with our actual experience right now in criminal justice. So moving on now, if I may, and questions at the end, we'll if you could hold them for all three speakers, that would be preferred. And I'd also like to also add to the list of attendees, Representative Mikey Sherrill has also joined. Thank you very much, Congress-Lady, for joining us today. The next speaker is Maria Vinci Savatier. Maria is the Executive Director of Deidre's House since 2003. It's a nationally accredited child advocacy center and is the only site in Morris County where child victims of abuse and or neglect can be forensically interviewed and prepared for trial by law enforcement, medically examined and treated by a pediatric abuse specialist, and clinically counseled in English or Spanish, all under one roof and all free of charge. As Executive Director of Deidre's House, Maria has combined her legal knowledge and her business acumen to improve and to add to the programs and services offered to child victims and their families. She's increased cooperation and collaboration among law enforcement, child welfare agencies, and organizations investigating crimes against children and providing services to child victims. Maria also educates the community regarding child abuse prevention and reporting and emerging issues in child welfare through speaking engagements at schools, corporations, and community organizations. Maria has been the chairperson of the Morris County Multidisciplinary Team since 2004. She is a child advocacy representative to the New Jersey Governor's Child Advocacy and Multidisciplinary Team Advisory Board, and is a member of the Board of Trustees of Blair Academy, the Greater Morristown YMCA, and Preschool Advantage. Before leading Deidre's House, Maria was an international transactions attorney for 13 years. Her primary practice area was the negotiation of international contracts for major corporations doing business in the Far East and South America. She received a BA in International Relations from American University School of International Service and a Juris Doctorate from University's Washington College of Law. She's admitted to practice in 3 jurisdictions, including New Jersey. Maria, we welcome you, and we're looking forward to your particular segment of this seminar today. Thank you,
Prosecutor Carol. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. Before I begin, I just want to say that the annual recognition of Victims' Rights Week by the Morris County Prosecutor's Office is critical because it's an important signal to the community and to crime victims that we stand ready to support them, and we will be with them every step of the way as they face the challenges of obtaining hope, healing, and justice. I thank Prosecutor Carol for shining a light on the mental health issues that are facing our community as a result of COVID-19. So as Diane spoke to you just a second ago, Deidre's house has seen many of the same factors affecting child victims in our community as Diane saw affecting people in intimate partner violence and domestic violence. Almost to a word, we're seeing almost the exact same things that Diane is seeing at JBWS. Before I begin, I want to say that in Morris County, it's really a collaborative effort in helping victims, and in particular, child victims. Without our Prosecutor Carol, Donald Pascariello, Amanda Holloway from the Victim Witness Unit, and members of the Sex Crimes and Child Endangerment Unit, and our partner multidisciplinary team members, we could not provide the justice, hope, and healing that child victims in Morris County deserve. So we want to just say thank you to our partners in this fight. Deidre's house was founded in 1996. Well, actually, it was originally founded in 1994 and opened its doors in 1996. As Prosecutor Carol spoke about before, Jim and Georgia O'Brien were the primary movers behind opening up a child advocacy center in Morris County. And each and every day, my staff and I remember the mission that Jim and Georgia set out to accomplish. And we remind ourselves every time the doorbell rings that that is the door of opportunity to help victims of child abuse and neglect that Jim and Georgia hoped for. Since 1996, our doorbell has rang over 40,000 times with child victims looking for us to provide critical services that they need to obtain hope, healing, and justice. Who we serve all Morris County child victims. We do not discriminate between documented and undocumented. We have about 2,800 child visits per year. We see clients from every municipality in Morris County. I always tell people when I speak and educate the community that a pedophile does not look at a child's bank account. They are unfortunately equal opportunity offenders. Our clients range from any time a child is verbal all the way up to 21. We serve up to 21 because the American Academy of Pediatrics defines pediatric up to the age of 21. We also serve adults who are developmentally disabled, and we also provide counseling to adults who experience abuse as children. What are the services that we provide? In conjunction with the Morris County Prosecutor's Office, we are the site for forensic interviewing and trial prep for child victims. We provide clinical counseling both in English and Spanish in an individual and group setting. We also have a medical program that is staffed by pediatric abuse specialists from Audrey Hepburn Children's House and Hackensack Regional Medical Center, where children are brought to us to be treated and diagnosed in the event they are injured in a child abuse situation. We also provide scholarships and financial assistance, and we have seasonal drives and holiday programs. Our community programs, we chair the Morris County Multidisciplinary Team, the Morris County Child Abuse Prevention Collaboration, and we go out into the community on a regular basis to teach them about the signs and how to report child abuse and how to prevent children from being at risk. We also have a unique program called the Game of Life, which we have in conjunction with our multidisciplinary team partners and organizations throughout Morris County, which educate high schoolers as to the resources available to them if they are in crisis. I'm coming to you today from our children's waiting room. This is a photograph of the waiting room. The whole idea behind a child advocacy center is to provide a non-traumatizing environment where all the different disciplines that have to intervene in a child abuse situation can come and meet the child where they are. So it's a one-stop shopping kind of concept where a child can be brought to be forensically interviewed, then medically examined and treated, then be brought repeatedly to be clinically counseled, and then also prepared for trial. One of the most critical parts of the program is that we provide a child-friendly environment in which the Morris County Prosecutor's Office, the detectives from the Sex Crimes and Child Endangerment Unit can come and forensically interview child. Those detectives are specially trained in an interviewing technique called finding words, which is designed not to put words in a child's mouth and have a child tell their story in their own words. This is just a photographs of our interview rooms. As you can see, they're very child friendly. Below is the observation room where anyone who will have to view the interview in real time can sit and watch the interview. This is critical because we only want a child to have to tell their story once, because when they have to repeatedly tell the story to various different people, it's re-traumatizing for them. So we don't want to add to the trauma of a very, very already badly traumatized child. So this is why the forensic interviews are done at Deidre's house in a very child-friendly atmosphere, and those interviews are recorded. So anyone who will have to view those interviews can then view them in their own time without having to ask questions directly to the child. This is our medical examination room that is staffed again by staff from Audrey Hepburn Children's House and our Regional Diagnostic Center, which is Hackensack Regional Medical Center. This is staffed by a pediatrician that has done a fellowship in pediatric abuse. These are our various clinical counseling rooms, both individual and group. This is very critical into a healing of a child victim. And we so appreciate Prosecutor Carol focusing in on the mental health needs of crime victims. We provide clinical counseling in English and Spanish. All of it is free of charge. It's on an ongoing basis, and we provide counseling for as long as a child victim needs it, whether it be months or years. Now let's talk about child abuse and COVID-19. As Diane talked about, due to the social, economic, and isolation of COVID-19, there was a huge increase in child abuse throughout the country, in our state, and most likely in Morris County. What was equally concerning, as Diane talked about, is that the phones to central screening and our phones were silent for months. And that was not because it wasn't happening. It was because child victims and the people that they would normally report to were isolated from each other. Meaning children most often report to trusted adults, those adults being teachers, school staff, coaches, clergy, their peers, and family members. And because they were in isolation, they did not have the opportunity to disclose. And therefore, the reports of child abuse were not coming in. Back in March, April, and May of last year, when the phones were largely silent, it was a very fearful time for myself and my staff because we knew it was happening, but we also knew that children were isolating with their abusers, and they did not have the opportunity to disclose to people outside of their households. This was doubly increased the risk where you have parents that were suffering from substance abuse or mental health issues, or there was a history of domestic violence. Those children were at particularly increased risk for violence during this time of isolation. Also, it's important to note that in any time of crisis and economic stability, child abuse and neglect rates increase and disclosures decrease. That's a very worrying statistic. So while the incidences are increasing, the disclosures are decreasing. So what did Deidre's house do? We had weekly crisis needs assessments where we had our bilingual child advocates calling our individual clients and checking in on them and asking them what their crisis needs and about the stress levels in the household, if there was anything that we could do to help alleviate it. We also went out into the community through PSAs and press releases, asking the community when they were remotely interacting with children to look for certain signs that the child was under stress or maybe being abused. We were asking essential workers like teachers, home delivery people, pharmacy and grocery workers, the people who encountered children the most, trust your gut, look for signs of abuse, and err on the side of caution and report them. This was especially critical considering that children may only have one chance to get that help. So we're still asking the community during this time of academic disruption and social isolation to be very attuned to what they're seeing in the children around them, and to also give calls to family members and friends and see what's going on and ask if they can possibly help. Just lending a friendly ear can help lessen the stress in a household. Again, heightened stress, school closures, loss of income, and social isolation increase the risk for child abuse and neglect. I applaud the state of New Jersey that has recognized that the pandemic is an adverse childhood experience and are treating it as such and making additional mental health resources available to children in our community. One worrying statistic is that the pandemic has also affected healthcare seeking patterns for children that have been affected by abuse and neglect. Those children, even though they may have been injured, those victims may have not received the care that they need. Emergency room visits have declined during this time because people are reluctant to bring their children to emergency rooms. But when the children are being brought to the emergency room, what our emergency room personnel are noticing is that the severity of the injuries have increased exponentially, and these injuries most often require hospitalization. So even though the emergency room visits have declined, the children that have been brought to the emergency rooms, their injuries are much more serious and much more acute. Child victims have continued to receive clinical counseling by Deidre's House during this time through telehealth. And now that all of our staff are vaccinated, we can bring children back into Deidre's House for face-to-face counseling as needed. The other thing that we noticed has increased exponentially, and I'm sure many of the healthcare providers throughout Morris County have noticed this, is that child victims and children in general their psychiatric symptoms of depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation have increased exponentially. The increased demand for psychiatric evaluations and medication monitoring is staggering. Many of our psychiatric practitioners are reporting that they are completely full and cannot accept additional clients. We really must be cognizant of the fact that more resources are needed, or the suicide rate amongst our children is going to increase and we are going to see more children die. This is a time where a lack of psychiatric resources for all children is critical, and we must work to increase the access of mental health resources for all our children. As I said again, many of our children are suffering in silence, but as they return to the classrooms, playing fields, and playgrounds, child victims are disclosing horrific incidences of abuse, particularly sexual assault that occurred in their own homes. Many of the times, the sexual assaults were perpetrated by people that were unrelated to them, but were welcomed into their home during COVID-19 isolation as those people were fleeing our cities and trying to get into more rural and more suburban communities. Family members were accepting people that were unrelated to their children into their home, and as a result, they unknowingly were placing their children at risk. Morris County agencies must be ready to provide that increased level of forensic interviewing, psychological evaluations, clinical counseling, and medical examinations and treatment to child victims as we emerge from the isolation of the pandemic. It's your business, Everyone in the state of New Jersey is required to report by law suspected child abuse. If you suspect a child is being abused, please call Central Screening at 1-877-NJ-ABUSE or the Morris County Prosecutor's Office or local law enforcement. You will never be prosecuted if you make a report in good faith, and you can make that report anonymously. How do we recognize the signs of a child abuse during COVID-19? If you are interacting with a child remotely, or you're an essential worker and you encounter a child at your place of business, look for unexplained bruises or marks on that child. Look for a caregiver or an adult that's using harsh physical language or harsh physical discipline. Teachers, when you're interacting with a child, if you hear incidences in the background or you hear harsh language or yelling, that's an indication that things are going on in that household. Or if you see a dangerous object in the background, for instance, an unsecured gun. We're asking for people to engage with children and caregivers regularly. We hope that we ensure we want you to have the ability to have conversations in private when talking to children and families. Be curious, ask questions about children and caregivers about how they're doing, what's going on, are they doing okay? Listen to children and let them share their experiences, frustrations, and empathize with them as we approach our new normal. Pay attention to the environment during video chats, to changes in child or adult behaviors during these remote interactions. Suggest resources and refer families for more support when you feel that they're needed. And you can always connect with us at Deidre's house in order to get help. We know the resources available out there, and we stand ready to help all children, and especially children that have been victims of crimes. This is Child Abuse Awareness Month, and we're reaching out to our community and asking them, if you see something, say something. And as Diane said, you can help us by reaching out, offering to volunteer, to donate. And during April Child Abuse Awareness Month, we are running a silent auction that you can access at deidreshouse.afrogs.org or by just going to our website. Thank you, Prosecutor Carol, for the opportunity to speak during Victims' Rights Week. And I just want to iterate that we are forever grateful to Jim and Georgia O'Brien for being the prime movers behind Deidre's house. And they have affected the lives of thousands and thousands of children in the past and for generations to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Maria. That was very, very useful information that you provided. Just a couple of remarks before we get to the final speaker. David Young, the Chief of Police in Wharton, and Edward LaBruno, the Mount Arlington Chief of Police, have also joined. Again, just underscoring the importance of these issues, to our law enforcement brothers and sisters. I'd also like to point out that we enjoy a very close working relationship with the county sheriff's office, and I'd like to thank Sheriff Gannon for his programs, all of the HOPE programs of which we're co-participants, HOPE One, HOPE Hub, and others. All of these programs, Sheriff, are critically important to help some of the areas that have already been discussed today, and which we know go well beyond just substance abuse. And in that same vein, I'm going to make some remarks at the end of the speech at the speakers concerning the mental health work group, because again, a lot of the issues that have been raised do involve mental health challenges of the subjects involved. So the third speaker, if I may, is Carolyn Dean. Carolyn has worked within the Division of Criminal, so used to say Division of Criminal Justice, Division of Community Outreach and Support, DCOS, at Newbridge Services since 1999. Starting as a case manager in the community residences, Carolyn has assumed multiple roles and responsibilities, leading to her role as executive director of the division, overseeing the departments of community residences, community support services, and senior assistance for independent living. As a community mental health center, Newbridge Services brings balance to people's lives through housing, counseling, and education. Among the multitude of programs available to support the needs of local individuals and families, these departments provide psychiatric rehabilitative services for people with severe and persistent mental illness, in community residences and for people living independently in Morris, Passaic, Sussex, and Bergen counties, and case management services for older adults living independently in the community. After evolving, DCOS programs have expanded during Carolyn's tenure in leadership roles, including the acquisition, renovation, and service enhancement of local residential healthcare facilities, allowing the preservation of the home and independence of 10 individuals, and multiple expansions of the Community Support Services Program, which now offers specialized assistance to individuals with mental illness who are homeless or have particularly intense medical needs. Further supporting New Bridge's vision as a trusted community partner, Carolyn has had the opportunity to acquire additional trainer certifications, including being among the first people in New Jersey trained to be a mental health first aid trainer. Carolyn additionally serves on the Passaic County Advisory Council on Disabilities. Carolyn received her BA in psychology from New York University and her master's degree in clinical and counseling psychology at Teachers College, Columbia University. Carolyn, we welcome you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction. I'm going to work on sharing my screen. Please let me know if you can see it.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So now I don't need to introduce myself. I'll move right on to introducing New Bridge Services. New Bridge Services, I apologize, I'm having problems getting this slide to change. New Bridge Services was established in 1963 by some community members who recognized that there were some counseling needs in Pequannock. Since 1963, New Bridge has constantly evolved as a partner with Morris County residents. We have worked to identify needs and to fill those needs. We serve children, young adults, adolescents, and seniors using counseling, housing, and education programs. We have psychiatrists on site, and we have day programs available to people with severe and persistent mental illnesses. We also have a community response and education program that provides programming about opiate use prevention. We teach about suicide prevention. We provide mental health first aid training, as already mentioned, one of my favorites. And we also act as a responder when there is a community or school tragedy. So hopefully you never need us, but we are out there and always available to you. I want to take a second just to thank you for acknowledging mental health as an important issue regarding victims' rights and in the community in general. We often, as mental health advocates, feel unrecognized. Mental health is a very isolating experience for people. However, just for a little bit of perspective's sake, it is not, oops, I apologize. We'll go back to that screen. Or not, because I've got to get that right back open. So mental health issues really are not as rare or as unusual as people think that they are. Here we go. 1 in 5 adults in any given year have a diagnosable mental illness, and in a lifetime, 1 out of 2 adults have a diagnosable mental illness. About half of the mental illnesses have an age of onset of about 14 years old, which makes prevention and early intervention extremely important. I just need to figure out how to slide. You can see the...
Yeah, we can see the slides.
Okay, so now I just need to move it so you can actually see the slide.
Just hit slideshow. Hit slideshow.
Thank you very much. Okay.
From
current slide.
Yeah.
All right, so the other important thing to recognize is that from the beginning of mental health symptoms, the median time frame for people to get help is about 10 years. So one of the things that I was tasked with talking about here or addressing was the increase in death by suicide and opiate overdoses. And I'm going to kind of live in the Venn diagram that join those 2 events. which really is the mental health piece and the reaction to psychological trauma. I want to go ahead and make sure that I debunk a little bit of a myth that is perpetuated by the media and by the entertainment industry. That myth is that people with mental health problems are violent and unpredictable. This myth serves to isolate us further from our community members and our neighbors. The fact of the matter is that the vast majority of mental health people with mental health problems are no more likely to be violent than anyone else. Only 3 to 5% of violent acts can be attributed to individuals with a serious mental illness. And people with severe mental illnesses are, in fact, 10 times more likely to be victims of violent crimes. There's a cycle of victimization for people who have mental health diagnoses, from having the diagnosis and the disabilities in themselves, and then repeat victimization that happens for people. So victimization and mental health. What I think the commonality between people who experience suicidal ideation and people who use drugs and alcohol and opiates is that most of them have experienced some sort of psychological trauma, being defined as an emotionally painful, distressing, shocking experience, which can have both lasting mental and physical side effects. So to me, the most important piece here is that long after someone's bruises from an assault have gone, the mental consequences still remain. Those consequences can include major depression. They can include thoughts of suicide, suicide attempts, increased use of alcohol and other drug disorders, and anxiety disorders, including PTSD, which I think a lot of people have heard about on the media. All of these conditions are serious risk factors for both suicide attempts and for substance abuse and use, which sometimes result in death by suicide and an overdose. Just like the other presenters, we have seen a huge increase in need for services in the past 12 to 18 months. So in March of 2020, we saw that adolescents between the ages of 11 to 17 screened positively for at-risk for anxiety, and 91% screened positively for depression, which is an outrageous number if you think about the effect of this pandemic. These stats are an increase in what we've seen before. There's been a 300% increase in anxiety in the past 12 months. This is really first quarter of 2020, and a 400% increase in experiences of depression. Suicidal ideation increased 200%, as defined by significant thoughts of suicide any time in the past 12 months. So in 2018, about 4% of people indicated that they had had thoughts of suicide. And in 2020, 10% of people were having these thoughts. Similarly, with substance abuse, when the pandemic hit, we were already in the middle of an epidemic. We were already seeing untenable numbers of deaths by overdose for opiate use. And with the pandemic, the very isolation that the other presenters were talking about also lent itself to unchecked drug and alcohol use and unidentified crises. So 13% of the respondents in the same survey I was citing before reported that they started using substances during the pandemic or increased their use of the substances. Alcohol sales went up by 25% during the pandemic. I don't know if anyone else noted local liquor stores just before our state closed as being inundated as if a holiday were about to happen. And then there is the added moment where we all had to pivot when we closed our doors. The Addiction Policy Forum found that 34% of people with substance use disorder experienced a disruption in services. We were very, very lucky that our legislatures and the insurance companies recognized that we needed to be able to provide services remotely to people. Prior to this, the ability to provide counseling remotely really had a lot of regulations that would not have lent themselves to being able to serve people during a pandemic. For example, you needed to have a screen. However, we have a good number of people who cannot afford a screen, or you hear about it with school systems also, may not have had the Wi-Fi in order to connect with us remotely. So we've been able to provide services over the phone. Now that time has gone on, a lot of our services are hybrid. So we have some services being provided directly in office, depending on the level of need of that person and their ability to connect with us remotely. And we have some programs that never went inside our community response program. I'm sorry, not the Community Support Services program, which serves people with severe and persistent mental illness living independently. We never left the community. In fact, we upped our services in order to allow people to shelter in place. So our staff were the people who were out in the grocery stores looking for the toilet paper for them and buying their food. And we're looking forward to being able to see more and more people in person, because we think that that has been a huge contributor to the increase in deaths that we're seeing. The fact of the matter is that even on the screen, you can still present as very professional and businesslike on top and be suffering behind the screen. We can look, and sometimes we're lucky and we find an emergency or crisis before it has become something that has, is a death or a trip to the hospital. But when we were in person, if someone was using drugs, we would be able to identify if we could see track marks on their arms. When we were in person, we could identify if someone who was depressed maybe wasn't taking care of themselves as well. People who were already isolated, a lot of these diseases are diseases of isolation, didn't have people reaching out to them. So one of the things that we talk about in mental health first aid is treating mental health issues the same way that we would treat other medical concerns. So if you learn of a neighbor who maybe has been diagnosed with cancer, the neighborhood's response is frequently to create a meal train, bake a casserole, reach out, say, what can I do? Can I drive you to the food store? We don't have the same response as people to mental health issues. And yet it's something that is so impactful to the community. This slide, the ripple effect slide, applies to suicide, but I think that it really applies to any mental health condition or drug and alcohol use condition, because we are, especially now during the pandemic, we are stuck inside witnessing people's, unflinchingly witnessing people's illness. But for those who are isolated, it is going unchecked. And when it becomes emergent, and as responders, we are handling these crises, we are also absorbing the impact of the mental health consequences. So we have EMS who are coming in on scene to someone who may be overdosing or maybe overdosed. We are, walking in to someone who has attempted suicide, and it shakes you to the core. I know, listening to the previous presenters, I think about all of the trauma that we absorb as a community, and know that since it affects us as a group, we need to continue to shed a spotlight on it and to address it as a group. So what can we do? We can be there for ourselves, and we can be there for each other. So it sounds simple, but it's not always. The pandemic stripped us of routine. It stripped us sometimes of our resources, be they socioeconomic, be they support systems. We can look at finding ways to establish that for ourselves again. We can exercise. We can eat the rainbow. We can limit our drug and alcohol use. We can limit our exposure to trauma and drama on our local news stations. We can reach out to a neighbor, become part of a greater community. it's putting people inside that has put us all in such danger, either for violence or just for depression and anxiety. We know from experience that the demand for our services is up. We know that that's not going to change for quite some time. And we also know that if we work together as community members, that it's not just the mental health professionals that can help correct the problem. We can talk in a way that's not afraid of mental illness. We can decrease stigma. We can work on making sure that people don't feel isolated or ashamed about a diagnosis or something that they're struggling with. It's okay to not be okay right now. And it's okay to be able to, it's a good thing to be able to sit with someone. So if you look out your front door and you notice that you have a neighbor who has not come out in some time and you don't see them, but now, especially now that it's nice, you don't see them working in a garden or maybe leaving to go pick up groceries or getting a grocery delivery, knock on the door, step back 6 feet and find out what's going on with them. Learn how to ask the questions. Mental health first aid is an 8-hour course that can be provided across 2 days or in a single day that teaches people the skills to be able to identify when someone is having an issue and to be able to learn how to ask the questions and how to respond and support them, just like you would with medical first aid. So if you notice someone with a cut, you would know maybe to hold their hand over their head, apply some pressure, and if it's severe enough to call the ambulance. Mental health first aid is a course that does exactly that for mental health disorders. And there's all sorts of kind of add-on groups to it. So there is a program specific for youth. There's an add-on specific to opiate use and minimization of risk for overdose. There is a program specific to law enforcement and the specific challenges that they confront when they're dealing with people who are having symptoms of mental illness. So I can't promote this course enough. You can also self-educate. There are resources online, such as the Columbia Lighthouse Project, which will help you learn how to identify who might be at risk for suicide, how to ask them the questions, and what to do if they say, yes, I'm feeling like hurting myself. You can browse the SAMHSA website, Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. There is so much data and there's so many resources there if you have a special topic or if you've identified someone who might have a special need. There are your community mental health resources. And I know that it's already been kind of touched upon for people with drug and alcohol issues, specifically opiate issues. The Hope One van is, honestly, it's just visionary. The ability to go out and to meet people who are in need of recovery services exactly where they are in the community is exactly what our community needs. So the Hope One van, if you see it driving around, is one of the sheriff's programs. It's staffed by peer recovery specialists and it's staffed by mental health professionals. And honestly, while their mission is, recovery oriented, I know that they also provide just basic human needs and assistance with getting people a meal, maybe helping them find a place to stay that night. And more recently, we've been really, really grateful to be part of the Hope Hub, which does that a little more remotely, bringing a multidisciplinary group of providers together. So there's senior services in attendance, there's educational agencies in attendance, there's mental health agencies, law enforcement, and people are able to bring forward information about individuals who are at high risk, who need assistance, and all of the people in the room, all of the social services that might be able to help them are there and ready to respond. So hopefully what I'm leaving you with is that while we are in an unprecedented crisis from a mental health perspective, if we come together as a community and really look at it without bias. We can solve this. This is something that none of us asked for, but we can only fix it as a group. So that's all that I have to say. Thank you again for your support. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Hopefully that wasn't too awkward. And that's it.
Thank you, Carolyn. That was, again, very helpful to everyone. I'd just like to make a couple of closing comments, and then we'll open it up for questions or comments if anyone has any. I would like to just point out that one of the things that we're doing at the county level, the Attorney General's office has directed that counties review their mental health programs. And in our case, we've set up a mental health working group, which is headed right now by Meg Rodriguez and Luan Tucker. And Maggie Calderwood, our first assistant, is the overall supervisor. And the purpose of this is to work with all of our agencies and develop from everyone's collective input what's known as the mental health toolbox. And what it is an identification of resources, the connections that are needed for those resources, so that one of the immediate objectives is to unite the persons that are in need with the services that are available and try to do whatever we can to facilitate those connections. All of the programs that you hear about, the HOPE programs, the whole series of HOPE programs, are critical to this overall effort that we're pouring into mental health right now. Mental health challenges are just present in all of these things. From the criminal justice point of view, it impacts, obviously, all of the cases that we deal with. COVID has only amplified the nature of the persons that have been closeted together. As several of the speakers have said, we do have issues right now with significant increases in domestic violence, child abuse. And one of the things that personally has been very upsetting to me has been the rise in suicide ideation or actual suicides by youth. It's a very serious situation. We are looking for professional help in the sense that we want to get whatever services we can out there to the public, and we're going to need as much community connection as we can. All of the organizations we're dealing with now, we've sent out certain information to them, and we're hoping the working group developing this toolbox will be able to get more information out, not only to the community, but also to our law enforcement agencies that are participating, all with the goal of connecting the person in need with the services that are available. That's a critical connection, and that's one of the reasons why, frankly, the HOPE program has been successful, because it's a reach out to the persons that may be hesitant to come in and participate. I'd also want to add that the judiciary is participating in this. The concept being that once we get persons in the courthouse for legal reasons, that they can be directed more specifically and precisely to the services that might be available. That's part of the HOPE Hub concept, but also within this mental health toolbox that we're going to be working on very diligently. So I thank everyone. I thank our legislative leaders, our county leadership, the law enforcement agencies that are committed, and most importantly, all of you that are out there, working in these areas every day. Diane gave a great summary on domestic violence. Maria gave a great summary on child abuse, and Carolyn talked about mental health. There's a common thread running through all of those, but each one has its own, special aspects to it. But I can tell you right now that the persons that we're dealing with, if it reaches the point of getting into the criminal justice system, cover all of those areas. And there is a certain amplification of it right now that is very disturbing, and that we're going to have to put more and more resources into it. One other aspect I want to point out is that with the new programs, both initially the bail reform programs and more recently the marijuana legislation, there's going to be more people that are going to be released from jail that are going to be in need of these services. And this is an important function that the prosecutor's office will be playing, which is reviewing these cases and working with the courts as to who should and will be released. But knowing the challenges that we face, many of these people are going to need many of the services that have been addressed today. So we are on the cusp, I think, of a new beachhead in law enforcement as a whole, when we're going to be dealing with the clinical issues that connect directly to the crime issues that we deal with. We want to keep people out of the criminal justice system. That's our goal. We want them to get treatment if they need it and go to the appropriate location where they can get the treatment and stay out of the criminal justice system. We don't want to burden youth with early criminal histories and so forth that they have to carry forth for their whole lives. It's not our objective. But by the same token, we have a very strong obligation to protect the public. And we have to balance that at all times. But right now, the resources that are being made available, we hope will make a significant inroad in this area. So again, I thank everyone that has participated today. And I'd open it up for any questions. I believe, Amanda, you've been screening some of these. If there's any questions or any comments that anyone would like to make, if you could moderate that, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, if anybody has any questions, you could just put it in the chat function and I'll be able to see that. Thank you. And just while we're waiting to see if anything comes in, I just wanted to let everybody know that, in honor of National Crime Victims' Rights Week, we will also be posting resources for crime victims in general, as well as some specific resources each day of the week on our Facebook post, our Facebook page. So I just want to make everybody aware of that as well. And we also we have a tree outside in honor of crime victims that we always light up and put flowers around every year in honor of this week. And there's a wreath in remembrance and recognition of all crime victims out there as well. So if anybody's driving by the front of the administrative building, they can take a look at that as they go by, if anybody's in the area.
And that'll be lit for the entire week, which will be in honor of all crime victims.
Okay.
And I don't see any questions coming in. So I think everybody, the speakers were very thorough and very clear. So.
Okay, I'd like to thank again, specifically Amanda Holloway and Donna Pasquarello for all their work on getting this together. And we can close now. We're a little bit over. But thank you again, and I'm sure everyone here will be in touch in different ways over the upcoming months. We're going to put resources into this, all of these problems that we're facing. And thank you all, and God bless. Thank you.
Thank you, Prosecutor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you for everybody for attending as well.
Yes, thank you very much.